You mentioned Pan American. Is that more the local community in a sense of helping out as opposed to the corporate side? Is that correct? Or
Well, it is, at least in the US, one of the challenges facing Asian Americans, the Pan Asian American community, is that in the business, but actually, it's actually across all sectors. We're very well represented, right, in the entry level roles, right? We go to good schools, we get to a mid level, but there is a severe drop off when we look at the C-suite, right, in businesses. If we look at the kind of presidency of like academic institutions, when we look at even dean, right, the dean's office, when we look at, in politics, right, we often are okay to get to a mid-level, but we actually have a really big issue in terms of representation at the top. And
got it.
often because of the model minority myth, it's not perceived as a problem. It doesn't seem like the Pan-Asian community has an issue. So a lot of the resources, a lot of the advocacy, right, goes to different groups. And some of the work we do is really to highlight that fact in terms of the underrepresentation at the highest levels, and like what can we do, right, as a community, both as a network, but also as individuals, to positively impact that, right? And we have to look at ourselves, like what are we doing that may prevent us or slow us down to reach kind of some of these highest levels, and then what are some of the systemic bias pieces that we want to advocate against, right, to affect change. And there's a lot of that happening in the US. I don't know what it's like in Australia, right? But that's the type of work that I'm involved with, at least on the service side.
Interesting. I know obviously systemic is somewhat can be sort of out of control. Initially, you mentioned sort of blockers that prohibit people from realizing their potential. Have you sort of uncovered what those common blockers are?
Yeah, well, I would say it might be knowledge, it might be skills, it might be self-awareness. And I'll give some very clear examples. I would say in corporate, right, there's often, a blocker, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book that launched earlier, this year, right, Selling Your Expertise, is a natural blocker for really smart people who are technically gifted. They have a challenge moving from doing the work to being able to get other people to either buy the work, right? Whether, in services, they have to sell their services to someone to buy, or even internally to get someone to buy their idea, right? Because you might have the best idea, but if no one's bought into it, it never comes to life. But yet, their focus isn't on being able to sell those ideas. Their focus is on being able to execute on those ideas. And what ends up happening many times in professional services or law, accounting, management, consulting, what ends up in terms of their career impact is they never move into the partner level, right? They stay at the senior manager or the VP, ED level at most financial institutions, as opposed to becoming MD or becoming partner or some very senior role. Or then internally, right, they never make it into, right, more senior level positions. So I would say that would be one very clear example of a skill blocker, right? Not understanding how the value of your work changes as you move up, right, in an organization, that it's less about execution and a lot more about influence, right? Because at the most senior levels, you have different leaders fighting for limited resources. So your inability to get those resources will impact your ability to get things done. And so that would be a blocker. For others, it might be like a mindset, right? They might have a kind of a fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And you might kind of be familiar with those terms where they just naturally say no to themselves, right? Like how many people want to have a podcast, but never do it, right? Like you have taken that step to do it.
It could be some sort of fear. There's a fear of failure, fear no one's going to listen to me.
That's right.
I have a fear of how do I even put it together?
Yeah, right. I don't have a niche, or I don't have an audience, or I don't know how to do this, right? And all those are blockers. because you have some interest in doing that, right? Like there's something telling you to do a podcast or to write a book or to pursue maybe a different career. But why aren't you doing it? Because there's something telling, like kind of a feeling, right, that you should do it. And maybe that's the way to live your best life, is to be able to bring to life the thing wherever it's coming from. Like I don't know where it comes from, but like you're inspired to do something, and being able to actually do it, I feel is an important component. I don't know if that's the end all be all, but just kind of talking through it. Yeah, I feel like, things just come up, and I think the people who are more filled are those who actually do those things versus those who it comes and then they always stop themselves from doing it, or wish they did it, or regretted that they didn't do it. And they kind of have that as like a focal point potentially.
I think sometimes I think you raise a good point about self-awareness. It seems it's very much someone needing to look at themselves in the mirror and giving themselves a critique. But when someone looks himself in the mirror, who's going to go to you? Who's going to go to themselves looking in the mirror? You know what? Jeff, you're terrible at this. You need to do that. But that's a big step to look at yourself in the mirror and go, you know what? It's not working, Jeff. You need to do something else.
Well, I don't even know if it's a critique as much as it might be accepting who you are. I think sometimes we don't accept who we are. So we always wish like we were different. And I think if we can accept that, like, hey, you know what? I'm like this, right? Like I'm ambitious, so I should do ambitious things, or I'm focused on relationships, so I should spend time cultivating relationships. I think sometimes we always, or at least always might be a strong word, but at least I find for myself, if I'm not careful, I focus on like what things should be, as opposed to seeing kind of things as they are, whether it's myself, whether it's a situation I'm in. And I'm still trying to learn that lesson for myself, is how might I act differently or feel differently if I just say, you know what, this is like the way it is, right? Like
let it be.
Let it be. Let it be. That's it. That's right.
Let it be. Yeah.
So I should be writing this down. I'm glad you're recording this. I'm going to rewatch this.
It was funny, I think a lot of the times, when I do get a guest on board, right? So he or she might fill in the questionnaire. I give them a call, I go, hey, like I can do this and this and date. This is when you can record it, right? And we get into a bit of a conversation pre-podcast, just to sort of provide a bit of grounding. You probably realize, Rob, that I pretty much go with the flow.
Yeah.
I just ask a bit of questions. I don't overthink it, because that's, I think, how it should be sometimes, right? We had a bit of a joke one time when I was talking to someone, and we're going to be recording it later on today in my afternoon. And we had a joke around how the fact that we overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
We overthink things. And then I said to myself, why is that? Is it the pressure of succeeding according to society? Is it the need to do something in our lives? I'm not too sure yet. But I think the whole let it be is very important.
Yeah, I think you're so right that it's easy to want to meet other people's expectations of, I guess, what we imagine that they would want from us, right? Or whatever it is, right, we're doing. And again, if that's what you want to do, I think that's okay. But sometimes, right, with any habit, it can end up being a default. And then all of a sudden you're running on default, right, all the time, whether or not that default is helpful to you or what you want to do or not. So maybe that's part of the value of this podcast, is you take people out of their default by asking these questions that
pretty much
simple, right?
Pretty much.
Simple.
It's funny.
So,
in a twisted way, I love asking random questions to people just to sort of see how they think. My wife thinks I'm crazy, by the way,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
she's my closest confidant when it comes to sort of how I sort of approach things. And she always
Yes.
goes to me, "How can you always ask these curly questions?" And I said, "I'm just curious to see how sort of people respond."